And we are live. Congratulations, everybody. You made it through the week. Another week of great food safety, food quality, protecting the public, making the amazing food that I eat and Alex eats and everybody else eats. And if nobody else says it, we're going to say it today. Thank you. We really appreciate all that you do, because we know in food safety, a lot of times everything is just assumed. We know it's not, and we really appreciate what you do. So welcome. If you're new, this is the Food Safety Chat, and my name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And every week I bring an expert on about a food safety topic, and we just have a conversation, which is awesome because this is not a presentation. It's not a lecture. This is meant to be an interactive exchange. And that's really what makes it so much fun, is that interaction with the audience who are viewing this live. So please let us know what you're thinking as we're going through this, and we'll weave in your comments associated with what we're talking about. So pull up a chair. This is going to be a really, really fast hour. You're going to be amazed. And if you've been here before, you recognize the face of this handsome young man sitting here on the screen with me. This is Alex Hanley, the owner of Navigate Food Safety. How are you doing, Alex?
Excellent, excellent. Thank you.
So one of the things that we love to do on the chat is we put in where in the world you're at. I am in Loveland, Colorado, where we are on our way to a gorgeous day, Alex. It's going to be in the 70 degrees F range here today, so a gorgeous day, which means there's probably snow on the way next week. So where are you at?
I'm in Prince Edward Island on the east coast in Canada, and we've had a bit of a storm. It's no snow yet, but it's been pretty windy. We get a lot of wind because we're just a tiny island in the Gulf of the St. Lawrence here, so it gets pretty windy. But that's what I'm at. That's what I'm at. But
well, it's a part of this too, right? No place is perfect. Everywhere has its challenges. You're in Florida, you're going to get hurricanes. If you're here in Colorado, forest fires. And another big thing is if you live out on the plains in Colorado is tornadoes and hail. Lots of very damaging hail can take place here in Colorado. So that hail season is coming up, which makes everybody always very nervous here. So I see we have people filing in here. So Steve, good morning. And yep, so we've got our comments going and looking great. Yeah, Illinois, Peoria, nice town. Austin's here. Always love to have Austin as well. So one of the things before we jump into our topic for today is everybody please join Alex and I for a ceremonial drink of your favorite beverage. Cheers.
Cheers.
That's funny. My wife always teases me. We have nice drinking glasses like you had put up there, right? The nice French, glasses. But I always drink out of a crappy old plastic cup that I've had forever. And she's just like, why? And it's like, I don't know. Because it's a guy thing, I guess. I don't know. Tammy, good morning. Maureen, everybody's getting in here. So, man, we got a ton to go over. And if you've listened to Alex on the chat here before,
Brian Morin says there's no video. Does everybody else see video?
I'm seeing you just fine on
I see you.
Yeah, how's video going, guys? So Maureen is having a problem with video. Anybody else? Can you see us okay? Everything's looking good on my side. I can see you. You can see me.
Okay.
Okay. So Maureen's going to track that down. Hopefully this will work. If not, she can pop in the screen and join us.
Yeah. So Tammy sees it. So we're good. Good to go.
Excellent. All right. Here we go, guys. So if you know Alex from one of our last chats, he is an amazing resource for all things auditing. And within auditing, it's really a two-way street. And the audience may or may not know this, but I ran the certification body for Eurofins. So we had a group in there that did all the work associated with that. And we'll get on the other side of that as well. So it's kind of a two-way street. And we know from the manufacturing side of things, Alex, that, oh my goodness, it's an extremely stressful event. The plant spends time getting ready, number one, right? You should be ready for audits all the time, but plants always, do a little sprucing up, and it's a good opportunity to kind of kick everybody in the butt if you're the quality manager and get some stuff taken care of that's been kind of hanging out there that it wasn't that important, but you'd like to make it look nice for the auditor. So all of this preparation takes place. Everyone is getting ready for your visit, Alex. the audit goes through, and one of those things that happen is the auditor has what they call non-conformances. So one of the things that we love to do on the chat here is you always need to define your terms. So we'll start with that. So Alex, what the heck is a non-conformance?
Well, yeah, so I like to look at the standard as the line, like that's the line and we need to be above the line all the time. And a non-conformance is like anytime we're not meeting the standard or the intent of the standard, there would be a non-conformance. One of the things we're talking about is what makes a valid non-conformance, because one of the things I always like to say is like, okay, if this is the line, this is perfection here. So there's range between being perfectly perfect and being non-conformant. And I think that's part of the challenge, part of the, like, what's a valid non-conformance, which is a topic that we've been spending a lot of time on. And every crack in the floor, a crack in the floor is not necessarily a valid non-conformance. But where would that line be? If there's a gap under a dock door, is that a valid non-conformance? There can be a gap about this big under the dock door. One day I was with a crew and we were looking at, they were looking at one dock and they were looking at the gaps under the dock door. And then there was a small cube van that was parked in a trailer dock door. So there was about, let's say a 2-foot gap all around the trailer, and everybody was focused on the gap in the dock door, whereas like a small flying elephant could have flown in the building on the other side. So sometimes, like part of defining a non-conformance or a valid non-conformance, I think is to understand, okay, well, everything's not perfectly perfect all the time. How can we say what's important? Because there's only so many resources. Like the team, I think you've been talking about an interesting topic, which is the prep before the audit. And maybe I can make a little plug here. I didn't tell you that, but we're working on we're preparing for a webinar on rating audits, and in that, rating external audits, SQFI is going through, and I hope I can say that, Tammy. But anyways, like there's been a conversation online, and it opens there's a lot of questions about the notion, like the prep for the audit. The more you have to prep for the audit, the bigger the gap between what you're doing every day and what you're doing for the audit. So if this is a day at the audit and this is your average day, well, what's this gap here? Is that gap working? Like that gap is clearly working for the audit. It's not working for food safety. Like it's either that food safety is here and the rest of the year you're not safe, or this is safe and the rest of during the audit you have to overdo it, or maybe in the middle is where safe is, and we should kind of like, should we be a bit more flexible on the little gap under the dock door and focus on the bigger issues and focus on making sure that everybody is safe every day? Like that's a big challenge. So part of that is the whole rating of the audit that has an impact on that. So we're preparing for a webinar with KEMA and SQF.
Nice.
And so that's not what we're talking about today, but that's what's on the back burner.
I love that visual analogy, Alex, because so you have a minimum, we'll just boop like this. We have this minimum standard, and we're sitting up here somewhere, right? And if you look at this from a statistical variability standpoint, you're doing this, right? And to your point, you want to be up here on a food safety standard versus the minimum, because you're going to be doing this. And one of that worst time within a plant is the busy season, right? Forget about the audit. So let's say you're a company that has a seasonal product, and most of the people buy your product in the fourth quarter for Christmas. Now, all of a sudden, everybody is really stressed. The sanitation crew has less time to clean. The quality people are running around checking all kinds of product. You're trying to get the stuff out of the door to fill the orders. Well, guess what? That variability in how you're doing things goes up, right? Your plus or minus is increasing, and your odds of doing this and getting below that food safety line go up a lot.
Exactly. So, cutting corners, like people do cut corners. Like we want people to do the right thing, even when they're, we want people to do the right things, even when nobody's watching. We all agree, but what is it that we have to do in order for people to do the right thing when nobody's watching? Well,
Right.
part of it is the right thing needs to be the easiest thing to do. It cannot be that the right thing is the hardest thing to do. Like it's like,
Right.
or if we can, just tell me how. Because what I've
Yeah.
noticed is that when nobody's watching, people will cut corners. So we need to understand that that's just part of human nature. And how can we set things up so that the cutting of the corner, like, how would I say, like, if you need to clean something 3 times a week and you don't have time to clean it, well, it needs to be clear which corners can be cut and which can't be cut. And that's back to defining, okay, this is perfect, this is good enough, and this is minor, major, critical. Okay, so the better we understand that, like not just minor, major, critical, not just conforming, not conforming, but the better we understand, okay, this is perfect, but how do we see what is safe and what is not safe?
Right.
The better everybody is set up to do the right thing every day, because this is really what we're trying to help people do the right thing every day. That's
right. Exactly. And so part of this too, and one of the greatest dangers in a production facility is exactly what you're talking about, Alex, in that you can have what I call a hidden factory set up. So if that quality manager is constantly trying to get up to that perfection level, and that may not be necessary, behind the scenes, people are trying to balance that stress with their other responsibilities, getting the product manufactured and, actually making money. And behind the scenes, that supervisor may start talking to the operators and saying, yeah, that's what the quality manager is saying, but here's how I want you to do things. And if that gets set up, you're dead.
You're dead. So I'll give you an example. Okay, so we live on an island. Around the island is all kinds of water. So, there's all kinds of fish processing plants. There's tons and tons of fish processing plants, really nice, lots of sand too and all that kind of stuff. But fish processing. So recent, like in the last 10 or 20 years, the standards have started looking like some of the standards, not every standard, but one in particular says, okay, microcontrol is super important. So we need to have high risk and low risk. So for decades and decades, people were wearing their boots around the cooker, and they didn't consider contamination from the floor as a significant risk on the finished product. Now there's a little wall that separates raw from cooked, because that's, we want to comply without really understanding, is there a significant risk? Well, when I was talking about corners that are cut on the day of the audit, while the auditor is in the plant, everybody's on their best behavior. When the auditor is not in the plant, when QA is not on the plant, how many people stop here and change their boots before going on the other side? Well, I don't know, but it's not 100.0%,
Right.
Airborne contamination, like, a positive air pressure between cooked and raw. Absolutely super important in dairy, super important in all kinds of products. In fish, historically, it hasn't, it just wasn't done, and people weren't dying. So why were they not dying? Were they not getting the memo that they were sick and they should die? Or is it because the risk was not there? Like, I'm just asking the question. But let's say that the pathogens are not airborne in fish, for the sake of the argument. So if it's true, then we're imposing an artificial requirement, and with that, the right thing to do, like when the positive air pressure doesn't work, everybody gets used to it. It's not really what I was talking about. Like, we're not talking about valid and invalid non-conformances right now. We're more talking about category-wide risk assessments, which is very important as well. And they're but it's kind of illustrating the notion that if we want people to do the right thing needs to be clear and specific to the area, and it needs to be what they do every day. And so,
and that's part of the reason why, as a good auditor, you'll see this with FDA or CFIA or whoever is in that facility. A lot of times they will go out into the facility and they'll just watch for long periods of time. They may camp out by the hand wash station coming out of the employee locker room for a period of time, because after a while they kind of blend in and people forget they're there.
You get
And
used
then
to
you
it.
start getting the real behavior.
Yeah.
And that kind of gets back to our topic for today with non-conformances, the auditor, whoever they are coming into your facility, it could be your internal audit as well. The whole purpose of a non-conformance is to find those things that are going to help you up your level. Your auditor is your friend, and you want him to identify those things because they are in there bringing in fresh sets of eyes to look at those non-conformances. And one of the most important things relative to this, and it's really one of the major topics of what we wanted to cover here today, is when an auditor finds a non-conformance, right? So you have a standard and you have a deviation to that standard, a non-conformance to that standard. Yeah. What does a good non-conformance look like, Alex?
Well, so we have 5 attributes for a good non-conformance, and that's straight out of kind of the ISO 1911 and all that kind of stuff. Like, it needs to be risk-based. Everything needs to be risk-based, so it needs to be significant. We've talked about like if it's not perfect but not significant, then it wouldn't be a valid non-conformance. Defining significant is a bit more complicated, but it sure needs to be significant. It needs to be in scope. So if I'm auditing against this standard here, but that standard over there requires something, well, it's out of scope. This, like today, we're looking at this standard, so it needs to be within this standard. Happens a lot that auditors will audit against 10, 20 different standards and they get things mixed up. So that's not fair. It needs to be objective, and objective means that it's got to be impartial. So we need to show both sides of the story. There was a gap under the dog door. Sure, that's an objective thing. We can all see there was a gap under the dog door. If we can also see that there has been no rodent activity in the facility for the last 5 years, well, sure, there's a theoretical potential that something could crawl in, but maybe the pest control program at large is working. So objective and impartial means that we're giving all the information, not just the information that suits us as an auditor.
Right.
It needs to be evidence-based. So, it's not hypothetical. Again, something could crawl in is hypothetical. It's not evidence. That's not part of the evidence.
Right, that's a good point. Could crawl in.
Anytime it says could, it's like in the old GMP audits, the notion was we're looking at conditions where something bad can happen, and could is fair game in the old GMP audits. Mm-hmm. In certification audits, we're working with objective evidence. So it needs to be objective, the full story, something we can all look at, and it needs to be reality, not I'm afraid that something could happen. Of course, in terms of risk, the notion of this could happen is kind of implied and comes into the equation. But when we write a non-conformance, it's not based on, well, that could happen. The standard says this, we're not doing that. In the notes, you had an example. You said, okay, the code says the HACCP coordinator and the alternate shall be trained in HACCP. Right. And let's say the situation is that the HACCP coordinator is trained, they've got their certificate, and the alternate is not trained. Well, that's pretty straightforward, like the standard says this, you're below. It's not in that case, it's like it's like being pregnant. You're never a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. So, so it's 100%. Like the alternate was not trained at all. It's a non-conformance. It's significant. It's in scope. It's the full story. It's evidence-based and it's clear. Like the last criteria is clarity. Mm-hmm. A good non-conformance should be relatively short because you want to focus on what was the issue and what needs to be fixed. And what we see very often is long non-conformances with a ton of detail about things that are not necessarily contributing. They might pertain to the same clause in the standard, but they just make the story just, like it's hard to follow. And if it's hard to follow, then it becomes the facility, the plant's role to kind of sift through that and decide what is it that we're going to do with that. So it should be fairly straightforward. Again, with the example of the alternate to the HACCP coordinator didn't have training, well, they need to get training. It's pretty straightforward. So
and examples like that I threw in our notes The yes or no ones are very easy, but unfortunately, in a lot of the standards, it's a lot harder than that. They're very open to interpretation, and the auditor needs to figure out if it's compliance or not. So one of the things I wanted to make sure on this, because you had said something very important, Alex, in your comments, was the scope. And I want everybody, this is something I trained all of my quality managers in. You don't need to say this verbatim, but you need to say a version of this if you're going through an audit. So write this down if you're not aware of this. So let's say I'm the plant and Alex is the auditor coming into my plant. And we're being audited to SQF for food manufacturers, version 8, and we are under Food Safety Code 17 or something like this. So Alex is going to come in, we're going to have our opening meeting, and one of the first things when Alex and I sit down to begin the actual audit is I'm going to say something like this: Alex, we're super happy to have you here in the plant. We were very happy with the audit last year that you gave us. I'm very confident this year you're going to be very happy with the improvements that we've made in our facility. We're very proud of the work that we've done over the last year. Just to be clear, we are performing an audit to SQF Food Manufacturing version 8 for food sector category 17. If you see anything outside of scope that you would like to make me aware of, I'd be more than happy to hear that. Right? Who's not going to agree to that? It's a very straightforward setting of the foundation and the scope. To Alex's point in there, auditors are certified sometimes to multiple standards. So if you're someone like Alex who has expertise in a great variety of different areas, he's got certification in a wide variety of standards and food sector categories, and he can go in and audit all kinds of different businesses. So it may be that he is looking at an SQF audit and he's thinking of some things in BRC. And with that piece of it, then you need to be able to go back then and circle back and make him aware of those differences. And if Alex says, oh, you should be doing this, and that's actually not something that's specified in SQF, you can circle back on that and make sure that it is within the scope. And the way you do that then is to use a phrase like, oh gosh, that's a really good observation, Alex. I'm not quite sure where that is in the standard. And so then you can then talk with the auditor to nail that down. And so it looks like we're having a little bit of difficulty here. So one of the things with people living on islands in Canada is that internet connection may be that good. So we'll give Alex a little bit here to get back online. So in that example that we were talking about is, what does a well-written nonconformance look like? To make that point again is that for the ones that are straightforward, you did this or you don't do that, those are pretty easy to write. So the example I had in here was 2115 from the standard. The primary and substitute SQF auditor shall, means you have to do this. Point 3, have completed a HACCP training course. So then the auditor is going to ask for the evidence for that. And within that evidence, the auditor is going to decide whether or not it's still valid. And if you made the simple mistake of, oops, the alternate hasn't completed their training yet prior to this, then the auditor is going to give you a deviation for that and is going to require writing up that particular example. And in that, then it needs to then follow through that model of, according to 2115, you need to have a SQF HACCP trained practitioner and a backup. This is not in place. The backup has not completed their training, minor nonconformance. The follow-up from the plant then is to correct that to the auditor is, yep, we have scheduled the training, provide evidence. Here's the evidence that we did this. And then moving forward from that. And then that goes back for review. So there's a tier in place associated with this that takes place behind the scenes that you may not necessarily be aware of. So with that, let's see here. I normally turn my phone off here during our chat so that nobody bothers us. Let me turn on the phone here, see how things are going with Alex. So I definitely want to get Alex back on here because he is an amazing resource for this information for sure. So with that, it's very important then to be able to respond to that and close out that nonconformance. So within SQF, so for example, I'll talk to SQF because it's kind of the one that's the simplest for me to talk about, is behind the scenes what happens. And a lot of people don't realize this relative to audits. is, why does it often take so long for the audit to be closed out? Well, number one, the auditor has to write his report, which is why at the closeout meeting, they always say this is a preliminary audit finding. And Alex has some tips on that we're going to go over on that side as well, which are really helpful as well, getting ready for that closeout meeting. So hopefully he'll be able to rejoin us here shortly. But within that, what happens after that is the auditor then writes up the report and goes through and lists out all of the deviations, all of the information. Everything has to be filled out in that audit. So within a 2 or 3 day audit for SQF, hundreds of questions that auditor needs to go through and check. And all that needs to be completed. What happens next? That goes to the certification body. So the certification body, who the heck are they? They are groups like Eurofins or Eagle Consulting, you name them, right? Certification bodies manage the standards that the schemes create. So SQF owns their standard. Then certification bodies essentially rent the standard to use and audit against. And the auditors work for the certification body. The audit is submitted back to the certification body. And at each certification body, you have a technical manager or managers. Okay, what do? They then take the information that we're talking about here today, and they will then, oh, Alex is trying to get in here. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And the auditors, let's see, I can see him. That's a good sign. Hey, you're back. All right.
Apparently I'm back. I can hear you.
All right. So I'll catch you up on where we're at. I'm kind of going through with the audience. When a nonconformance is written, what happens with that nonconformance, right? The auditor writes his audit. It goes back for technical review. And that's kind of the stage at explaining how the audit works that I'm at right now.
Yep.
So the job of the technical manager at the certification body is to do exactly what we're talking about. Good auditors know how to write a fantastic nonconformance. It's going to list the standard. It's going to list the deviation that the plant did to that standard. And it's going to list the evidence, right? So here's what the standard says. Here's what I saw. Here's what the nonconformance is with that. It's now the job of the plant to respond to it.
And it's going to refer to risk.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So part of the job then, the plant side of things, is to respond to that nonconformance. So in our earlier example of, oops, the backup was not HACCP trained. Okay, now as the quality manager, I'm going to submit to Alex proof that I'm closing out that nonconformance. Okay, so Sally is my person who wasn't trained. Alex, we're closing out this nonconformance. Here's a receipt of the copy of the training course she's going to be attending next month. When that's completed, we will get you that certificate to prove to you that she has completed the training. And then Alex will review that as the auditor and decide, to your earlier point, whether or not that's a valid response. So the role of the technical manager is to go through all this stuff and make sure that the auditor is citing the right reference in the standard, because a lot of times you're not quite sure where it goes in the standard. Making sure that write-up is clear and valid, to your point, and that the plant's responses that the auditor approved were also sufficient to close that out, right? So there's tons of work that takes place behind the scenes. And as an auditor, a lot of times you're in communication with that technical manager. And sometimes you're even in contact during the audit because you're not quite sure how to write something up as the auditor, right?
Yeah. Part of the one of the things you're talking about is the notion of referring to the standard in the nonconformance. And the good thing about that, if it's done, if when the auditor, if they write the nonconformance based on the exact words of the standard, then we know that it's in scope, and we know exactly what needs to be fixed. So that's, in order to get it right, there's a number of easy tricks to do. So that's one of the things we talk about, just making sure that you always refer to the standard in writing your nonconformance. You talk about the technical review, which in theory, the technical reviewer, and they should be using those same 5 categories, the 5 attributes, and say, okay, if all their nonconformances that come in meet all those expectations, then those are valid. If they're not valid, in theory, they should send it back to the auditor and say, okay, you need to rework that because it's not quite clear what you're saying, or you need to rework that because it's the wrong clause, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So
Well, and
the technical review.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Bit of a delay in our timing here. It's throwing us
I know.
off.
I see the same thing here. I apologize. I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's the recording, but anyways, then the technical man, or then the quality manager or the food safety leader will be doing what you're talking about. They'll be doing the correction, or like addressing, or the corrective action, if you want, like addressing the immediate issue. Actually, it's usually, I see correction as fixing the food, corrective action as resolving the situation. So they're doing the corrective action, getting the training, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a whole root cause analysis section. And I think we should leave that for another day. That's a huge can of worms, because it's part of what needs to be done. Again, part of what we like to do in our training is to show what good looks like. What is a good non-conformance, and contrast that with a non-conformance that doesn't meet the expectation. And so we can see how to do it, and what the opposite looks like. And with root cause analysis, I think one of the big challenges with the industry is because and the cause of a minor non-conformance is going to be immensely different from a critical non-conformance. If we have one process that kind of is supposed to be used for all types of non-conformances, then that complicates the root cause analysis process. Also, if, like, we're all humans and auditors do make mistakes like anybody else. Like, I'm an auditor and I've made mistakes, so like I know it's possible, and we try to do as few as possible, and the better feedback we get from the technical review, in this case, amongst other things, the less mistakes we make. And if we don't get good feedback, we might carry over some mistakes. But what happens is, if as an auditor I make a mistake and I call something non-conforming, the plant will have to fix that. So, fixing a problem that's not a real problem, there's a name for that. It's called red tape. And so the plant starts doing something that doesn't add value in terms of food safety, but adds value in terms of being certified. It becomes a cost of doing business. I hate to say it's part of reality, like, and I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say, but I've heard it a million times, plants do things they don't necessarily believe in, because they've been told by the auditor, and they haven't really found a way to explain why they're already in control. That's hard enough as it is. But if they have to do a root cause analysis on that, in addition to having to do something they don't really think is necessary, or sometimes they're right. Like, they're not always, it's not always, the auditor is right and the plant doesn't understand. Sometimes it's the other way around. And so if they have to do root cause analysis on that, then that becomes very confusing. So all that to say that the whole root cause analysis, we could talk about it for hours. It's also part of what's going to happen when handling non-conformances. But that's why it's important, long before we get there, to make sure that the non-conformances are valid, they're clear, they're in scope, they are risk-based for this facility, for this product category. And one of the things, I don't know if you've mentioned, but one of the things we really like to do is, before the exit meeting, it's good to look at the non-conformances with the food safety leader, to say, okay, this is what I'm going to write. I'm going to write it this way here. Does that make sense to you? Yes or no? Like the rating, I'm in charge. I'm the auditor. I'm in charge of the rating. If there's disagreement there's a process called an appeal, and you can appeal those non-conformances. You can say, I disagree, this should have been a major and he called it a minor, and I really want my team to, or you could say, that never happens. But basically they'd say, I think this shouldn't be a non-conformance. So in the appeals process, that's the proper process for that. You are quite familiar with that process with Eurofin and with all that. But just because the auditor has the last word for and for rating doesn't mean that we can't talk about how things are written. That we can't say, okay, right, this is how I'm going to write it. Do you think this fairly represents what we saw out there? And right, and that makes it so much easier for the facility to focus their work on fixing things that make sense to them. And it's going to make it so much easier for the facility to do a root cause analysis if they really understand and they agree with the significance of the finding. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And out of that, there's a couple of key lessons that people need to understand. Is number one, as the person in the facilities who's responsible for that certification and is going to be interacting with Alex as the auditor, is you need to really understand that standard, read it, understand it, so that you can have a good dialogue with that auditor, because that's their world. And the standard is just not 2.1.1.5 or whatever's written. You need to understand, as Alex is referencing here, what are the mechanisms associated with the audit itself? What are the follow-up steps associated with it? What are the steps for contesting things that you don't quite understand? How are audits scheduled? All this information that's listed at the beginning of the standard, you need to understand that as well. Ryan had a comment here, Alex, let's see here. So the auditors are being audited by their performance too, right? And that so
it should be, yes.
Yeah. So when there's a whole process of when you want to become an auditor. So you have to have your qualifications, you have to go through training, and then you have to go through what are known as shadow audits. So if I'm a new auditor and I'm just getting my feet wet on doing this, they don't just throw you out immediately. Alex, as like the senior auditor, would go along with me to make sure I know what I'm doing. So there's a whole category that the certification bodies talk about called auditor calibration. And to Alex's point earlier, auditors are people, right? And they have different approaches and different personalities and different ways of looking at things. The goal is to come to, on both sides of that equation, as a non-objective scientific evaluation of that facility as we can. And that's a two-part relationship to get to that. Oh, it looks like Alex is freezing here again. So with that piece of it, this is a constant that we're looking at in both sides of the equation, auditor calibration, right, Alex? I can see him, but I can't hear him. Can you guys hear him?
There's a yeah, there's a big working group at the GFSI at the level, and auditor competency has been a challenge for a long time, for decades, and they're working.
Yeah, auditor competency is something that is very challenging. Yeah, because auditors are people, and understanding that, because part of this as well is that with auditors, so a lot of times if Alex is going out to perform audits, he's performing multiple audits on a trip. You want to be efficient. So let's say that during a given week, Alex is performing 2 or sometimes 3 audits. He may do a couple of SQF audits. And let's see, so we're doing some local recordings on here, so maybe that's slowing it up, but we cannot turn that off. That may be doing it. But the good news is that what Alex is referring to here is with StreamYard on local recording, you can get copies on both computers. So with this technical difficulties, you'll be able to go back to this presentation and rewatch it and I'm going to be able to merge everything back together so that we don't have difficulties associated with this. So hang in there, everybody. Hopefully we'll get this thing fixed. Technical challenges are always interesting, but we work in quality. So part of our goal is to forge forward. So because this is such important information that we're going over here today. So I'm going to try something on my side here as well.
Jesus.
So I'm getting little bits of audio from you, Alex.
Can you hear me now, Bryan?
But it's very
Can't
choppy.
hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you slightly. Whoa. Dr. DeFeo in Connecticut just said they had an earthquake. Holy moly. Earthquake.
Can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you slightly.
I can hear you.
All right. We're getting there.
Okay.
I'm going to have to issue a non-conformance to StreamYard.
Well. Oof. Yeah.
Oh, so you're getting better. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
So to Ryan's point here on auditors being audited, so the certification bodies are audited as well. So as a certification body, you also have your accreditation. So for example, at Eurofins, we were accredited by an organization called Jazz Hands out of Australia and New Zealand. And they come up and audit the certification bodies because the standards, so SQF, for example, has rules that you need to apply to your operation if you want to be able to perform SQF audits. So it's kind of like what we were talking about here with auditor calibration and training and corrective actions, and all of these type of activities are all involved.
And all that depends on the auditor competency framework.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big challenges. Like that's the big challenge that's happening at the GFSI level. Everybody is auditing each other, but it takes a lot of, auditing is a very, very difficult job. There's so many aspects. You have to audit dozens of different programs. You audit dozens of different categories. You audit all over the world. So how do you define what a competent auditor needs to be? Like, what are auditor competencies? And the work that we've done with a valid non-conformance is, like, if auditor competency is like all that, writing a valid non-conformance might be just one small aspect. But if we can be very clear and we can say, this is the line, this is a valid non-conformance, and this is an invalid non-conformance. And these are the 5 criteria. And if we can agree, then Jazz and Z can come in and start auditing Eurofin to say, are you monitoring your auditors for, for this aspect, or how have you defined auditor competency, and are you monitoring specific competencies? And that was the kind of the idea that we've worked with when we developed this training, was to give the whole industry an example of what good looks like when it comes to auditor competency.
Absolutely.
Because if we want people to trust the certification, there's, like, the GFSI is kind of in the big challenge where they've got to, they have to ensure that people trust all of the certification programs, and that happens at the GFSI level. And because we want fewer audits, we want people to have more confidence, we want the audits or the certification to tell apart the companies that are indeed ready all the time from the ones that are not necessarily ready every day. That's the purpose of certification. And and the auditor plays a role in there, but it's not all on the auditor. They're focusing on auditor competency, but we need to look at. I think we need to look at the competencies of the other actors as well to support that auditor, so that we set up that auditor for success.
Yeah.
So that, so that the whole certification process delivers trust in the industry. That's
Right. Well, and I think too, right, on the
where we came
non-conforming
from
side of,
when we
yeah, other side of it.
developed
So we're
that.
getting real-time reports here on earthquake activity on the
Am
East
I
Coast.
coming? Like, can you hear me properly now, or there's still
It's a little
delay
buffery,
here?
but I can hear you at least. So we'll kind of play it by ear here. So the analogy I was thinking of here, Alex, was we were talking earlier about writing non-conformances for easy things, right? Here's what you must do. They didn't do it, right? That's very, very clear. The training didn't take place and you need to do the training, get the training done. Okay, that's easy. So the other part of that is when auditors are looking at things that are taking in the totality. So for your example earlier, there's a gap under the dock door where something could come in, right? That's something as the auditor is looking in the plant that he's going to file away, he or she's going to file away, but it is a piece of evidence that may lead to something bigger. So the analogy I was thinking of here, Alex, is employee reviews. So if you're a manager and you have people working for you, you're looking for examples of good things that you want them to be doing or bad things that you don't want them to be doing. And you're constantly giving your employee feedback and you're doing quarterly reviews. And then at the end of the year, you're summarizing your overall performance of that employee. And you have particular elements of evidence that lead you to a conclusion. It's the same thing here. So if you're in the plant and you are evaluating the GMPs of that facility, a bad auditor would see one employee who doesn't quite wash their hands correctly. Aha, I'm going to write you up for a non-conformance for hand washing. No. They need to be looking at it for compliance to the standard and its application in the facility. So they may watch the hand washing station for a period of time to see if that behavior is standard practice, right? You may just have one employee who's not doing a very good job, and you can follow up and work on that. But what the auditor is looking for is the system. If he sees one person go by and not wash their hand, and he sees 2 or 3 more people go by and not wash their hands, that then becomes elevated to a non-conformance. And depending on the severity, so to your example earlier, you're working in that fish facility and you're going on to that cook side and everyone has to wash their hands, right? And that auditor sees that and understands that that's going to elevate in importance, and it may elevate to a major, depending on that.
Yeah.
So Alex so that's part of the challenge. And that's the difficulty of being an auditor, right?
That brings back to the cause. Like, what's the cause of non-conformances? And we have a training on root cause analysis that's a bit different. And one of the concepts that I like to talk about is common causes. There are causes that are prevalent in a lot of facilities. And, kind of low-level supervision or a failure to supervise, putting everything on quality, expecting quality to come in and police the operators when it's actually the supervisors who have the power. That happens all the time. And if somebody doesn't wash their hands, if their hair nets are crooked, if there's a million different little things that are going to happen if the supervisors are not doing their job of enforcing the rules. Enforcing rules is the job of supervisors. It's not a food safety thing. It's an organizational thing. They have the power. They should have the responsibility. So if you go in and somebody's not changing their boots in the fish plant, or somebody's not washing their hands or whatever, it's not back to your good auditor. A good auditor would be looking at the system and not looking at, okay, this person didn't wash their hands, I'm going to write a non-conformance for that. But that's the beginning of the investigation if we want to do a bit more of a system audit. Where is that pointing at? It's pointing at supervision, for instance, and let's start digging into supervision. Let's talk to supervisors. Let's talk to operators. Are supervisors actually enforcing the rules? Yes or no? And I think, like, back to a root cause analysis. I don't think we need to do a root cause analysis if supervisors are not enforcing the rules. We just need to get the stick and start tapping and saying, okay, well, from now on, you need to enforce the rules because otherwise nothing's going to work. But at least it's a problem that we can that's getting closer to the it's a non-conformance that's getting closer to the real problem, if that makes sense.
Well, and out of that, and if you're listening to this live stream and you pull one thing out of what we're talking about today, Alex just said it, and I couldn't agree with what he said more. We are not police. The supervisors are responsible for enforcing the rules. They are responsible for their team and compliance to rules. And we need to make sure that they understand that their job is not just to get product out the door. Their job is to get the product out the door and do all the things that we're talking about. So on that investigation side of it, if I'm the auditor and I see someone who didn't wash their hands or didn't do it right and runs through, and I see a couple of other people not doing that well, I'm going to go talk with them. Right? I'm going to say, hey, Sally, I saw that you're in kind of a hurry there to get through to your job. What's going on? Oh yeah, we're behind on production and everything else, and it's we're really rushing to get this order out. I noticed that you didn't really wash your hands. Oh, yeah, right. And what that employee says next is very important. Why? Right? Oh, well, we normally don't do that. We're only doing that because you're here. Oh, really? So you normally no, we don't normally do that, right? Or if the employee says, you're right. Normally we do this and I'm not paying attention. I should have washed my hands better. I'm going to go back and do that right now. Excellent, right? We don't know, to Alex's point, nobody's perfect. Right? We're people. Right? Sometimes we need to be reminded of the right thing to do. And that's what an auditor should be doing.
One of the things I often like to ask people is, who owns bad cases? You were talking about production, and who owns the bad cases? Is production responsible for cranking out a lot of cases? Because there's always pressure for getting more cases out the door. But if you're making 1,000 cases and 100 of those are not good, do those 100 cases become the problem with, like, did they become quality's problem, or are they owned by production?
I hate that. One of the phrases I hate the most: we had a quality problem. No, we didn't. We had a production problem.
No, you had a quality problem.
Right. What are you doing about it? Right. Don't give me your hot potato, right? Don't give me your problem.
Yeah.
You did it. You didn't follow the rules.
Yeah. So production should be fixing their own problems. They should be, if you made 1,000 cases, but 100 of them were not good, well, you made 900, but really you've got a high defect rate, and that should be, like, it's as important to get it right the first time for them as, or it's more important for them to get it right the first time than just the whole volume thing. So
exactly. Yeah. So
in terms of owning food safety and owning quality, there's a bit of work.
It's everyone. And so with that, right? So with this whole non-conformance process that we're talking about, I want to make sure this point comes through, is that one of the things that Alex does, which I think is absolutely brilliant, and you should be using this in your audits, is he talked about earlier. Is so the audit's taking place, the auditor is doing everything we're talking about. There's non-conformances that are being written up. Have a pre-meeting. So if I'm the quality manager and Alex is the auditor, have a pre-meeting before the closeout and agree that what the auditor is looking at is valid and makes sense and is clear. Because after the auditor leaves, you're the one responsible for closing it out. So you need to make sure that you understand what non-conformances the auditor found and why. Your job in that meeting is not to try and haggle and negotiate your way out of every non-conformance. No, if there's things that are valid and were found, suck it up, make sure that you understand, and then go to the closeout meeting. You need to be united with the auditor in the findings, not against the auditor. You need to be able to present what was found to the rest of the team and the plant manager so that you can move forward, right? as a certification body, I saw this many times, Alex. Well, not many times. There was enough examples where it bothered me, where a plant gets a lot of non-conformances, and they have 12 minor non-conformances, and they will protest to my technical manager and the certification body all 12. And their theory is that, okay, if we can get 6 of these knocked off, then our score improves and we'll make it up to an acceptable score. And it's a shotgun approach. And when I see that, it makes me dig in my heels and be less cooperative to waive some of those.
In the can of worms, like that's another kind of can of worms that's quite interesting, because the games that people play in order to get a high rating, I think as a certification industry, we need to be clear what those games are and what are kind of on our side, what are the issues. I remember one of the CVs I was working with would say, okay, well, we will revisit everything, and we might, it might become a minor, or it might be taken off the list. It might also become a major. Like, it's not going to be either you win or else it's equal. You might lose. And so people have a chance, like they're kind of, they've got to be really convinced that what they're challenging is unfair, because otherwise, I've never been a technical manager, so I don't know. I think the example that you're giving, you told me, is quite unusual, but still we want to keep that as unusual. We want the appeal process to be used for what it's for, which is when there is disagreement about the validity of a nonconformance, not as a means of getting a better score because I'm going to get a bonus, or because, for whatever reason, I want to be getting an A or a this or a that because it's better for sales. Like, no, that's what we found. That's what we found. Not that's the score you got after you fought back the nonconformances. That's not a fair process.
That's not an ethical way to do things. Now, grant auditors sometimes misunderstand things, and that's why that pre-closeout meeting is very important. You may be right, and the auditor may have misinterpreted something. That's the point in time where you need to be working through that. And that's why writing a valid nonconformance is so very important. So we'll kind of wrap things up here, Alex, and bring this back to the 30,000 foot level. Any closing thoughts or things you'd like to bring to the audience today?
Well, we have that training that we've put online, and it's available for free. We would really like if we think it could make a big difference for the whole industry and bring things, kind of contribute to that whole trust in certification. That's why we built it. So we're welcoming everybody to take that training. We're working on, So, if there was one thing I would leave with that, as I said, we're working on a webinar at the end of the month. We'll be doing a webinar with Kima and with SQF on rating audits. So maybe we'll let you know then, and you can advertise when it gets a little bit closer.
Absolutely.
And that's if you go on the website, you'll see we've got a ton of other types of training. We've got training on root cause analysis. You were talking about understanding the standard. We have a whole series on understand the intent of food safety. A standard is not a teaching tool, so it's good to understand what food safety is before you even start looking at a standard, if you want to understand the standard. So there's a ton of stuff over there, and that's what I got.
Awesome. So I put in the comments over here, I put the link to the course, and it's free. So thank you, Alex. That's amazing that you're doing that. While you're on the website for Navigate Food Safety, he's also got other courses online that you can peruse as well. He's got an amazing selection of courses. And with that, so part of this too is always, focusing on things as a community and look at these. So I'm going to throw in the comments here as well. I haven't put this in there for a few chats, is my locals group, where I post recalls and other valuable information like the update to the Appendix 1 for the hazard analysis guidance document. You'll find links to things in there for that, and it's all free. I post in there a couple of times a week with recalls and things that catch my attention. So, like enoki mushrooms and listeria. If don't buy enoki mushrooms. It seems like there's a recall every week for listeria, right? So we keep track of things like that. So take a look at Alex's free training, which is amazing. So thank you for that again, Alex. Check out the locals group and join that if you would like to. That's also free, and we're happy to have you. And so with that, Alex, we'll close out our chat here for today. Bit of a technically challenged chat, but still, I think we got our message through to everybody. So everybody, enjoy your weekend. Have a great one, and we'll see you back here next Friday at the same time. So 10 a.m. Eastern, and we live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. And I'll have another amazing guest on the chat like Alex. And in the meantime, enjoy your weekend. Have a great one, and we'll see you back here then. Thanks again, Alex, and we will talk soon, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.